Copyright Stanford University, all rights reserved.
Okay, so I will talk a little bit about my perspective as a faculty member about attention, I think, that's out there, which is what are we doing talking about business stuff in an academic environment. Then what I want to do is turn to talking about a little bit about the business school, because I find that when I come over to this side of campus, it's a foreign object. And there are various, people have seen our MBAs and extracted all sorts of information from that. And what I want to do is try to provide a little bit of information, and along the way tell you as postdocs what the business school has to offer. I think there's an enormous amount that it has to offer. Yes, we could do an even better job than we're currently doing, but what I want to do is spend some time talking about, if you're interested, things that go on over on our new campus. One of the most impressive things about Stanford, now that I've been involved widely across the university, is just what an outstanding place this is. There is an outstanding business school over there, and there are very interesting things going on. So I want to try and talk about that, maybe in a way that later prompts some more questions. As part of that discussion, what I want to do is I'm here to do a pitch. My pitch is, actually there are two programs. Navaline was a participant in one. We actually, I think, have at least 6 alumni of these two programs, PRIE and SIE. So I'd like the alumni to stand up. I didn't get a chance to count all of you, but stand up, okay? These are all people that oh man, we have more than that. I missed everybody, okay. So there are actually quite a few people here who've been through these programs, and at the end you may want to look around at who they are if you want to ask even more questions about people who have suffered through me and other faculty, just what they got themselves into and whether they thought it was worthwhile. But I want to talk about those two programs because we are about attracting you all, postdocs, and so I want to tell you about those programs. And hopefully get some of you interested in actually applying and attending in those programs. So that's pretty much the agenda, and obviously questions at the end, and hopefully we'll have a fun discussion. Okay, so I want to start off with basically what I call the potential and the reality. I can read the slides. Basically, the potential, as I see it, is everybody's running around saying science and technology will save the world. You can pick your favorite thing, energy independence. Well, of course, it's the scientists that are going to come up with the way, the better solar cells, the way to change the world. Some of you may have noted that Solyndra went out of business today, so it's a little bit of risk there, but science will save the world. You can talk about economic growth, and Barack Obama now, given jobs are a very popular sort of thing to talk about, says, it's scientists and engineers who are going to create the startups that are going to create the technologies that are going to change the world, drive economic growth. So that's the promise. And then everybody says, oh, scientists and engineers, where are we going to find them? And the first place they point to is universities, and not too surprisingly, they point to universities like Stanford. I don't know how many guests must come through the engineering school, through the medical school, but I know how many come through the business school saying, we want to replicate Silicon Valley, and in particular, we want to get the same types of scientists and engineers, you all, who are being trained or doing postdocs at Stanford. And the reason we want to get them is because they have the secret sauce. They know about technology, and of course, it's just immediate that that's going to be translated into economic growth, energy dependence, national security, you name it. Namely, the presumption is science, technology, translational, it's all there. That must be what goes on at universities. So that's the hype, that's the promise. The reality is, universities are great at producing technical talent. You all are being trained or have been trained. If you haven't been trained at Stanford, get your PhD. Many of your postdocs are coming from other PhD programs. You've been trained by the best and the brightest to acquire a certain domain expertise, a certain knowledge base. And, I would say from talking to many scientists and engineers, the one thing that doesn't match up with the promise is most of you are ill-equipped to do the translational part, which is to actually be able to take ideas that are being worked on in labs and translate that into reality. So let me just talk a little bit about why the system is like that. It's like that deliberately, and as a faculty member, I think that's the way it should be. But basically, the way that you're trained to do research, you have to be put in an environment which is what I call not the real world. A reward system is put in front of you, which is the way you get ahead is peer recognition. Peer recognition involves publishing. It involves getting grants. It involves having a bigger, better lab, more doctoral students, better doctoral students. There's just a long list of things that go along with status. But those things, if you look at the list, have very little to do with this translational part that everybody's looking to the university for to solve the world's problems. And hence the disconnect, which is many of you, I think many scientists would love to have some application to the real world. I'd love to be able to go home to my wife and explain exactly what it is I do with my time. But we've already agreed that after 30 years she's just not going to go there anymore. It's too difficult to actually process. But I'd love to feel like, here it is. It's relevant. I'm not just an abstract faculty member. But the problem is, the institution, the way we're set up as a research institution, it frustrates that. So basically the observation is the reward system isn't necessarily aligned with the goal of solving practical problems. And yet, if you look at the need and the expectation of the outside, there's a notion that it should be. And that's a fundamental tension that I think will persist as long as universities persist, and I actually think that tension is a good thing. But I'll note that it varies by field, and I often, when I try to describe this to people, I think of some of the radiology PhD students who've been through PRIE and SIE. When I talk to them, their research is very applied. It's about imaging. It's about trying to improve patient outcomes by imaging. It's about the closest I can think of as research that's actually, it's pretty applied and directed. There's still some very broad theoretical things that go on, but it's very accepted, I think, in radiology to be working on things that actually are very practical. On the other hand, you take a field like mathematics, and I think it's almost immediately accepted that what you're working on just can't possibly be relevant, except perhaps if it's related to encryption or something like that. So fields vary, but I think for the most part, most research that's done at a place like Stanford is not commercializable. And the best immediately. And the best evidence I have for that is if you go talk to the Office of Technology Licensing at the university, which is a branch of the university that's actually responsible for keeping track of what is going on in the labs that could be commercializable. What the director will tell you is almost everything here that is potentially commercializable is probably 10 years ahead of its time when it's first discovered. Namely, we're really out there as researchers doing cutting-edge things, and that's because that's kind of what the profession peer review rewards, being way out in front. And yet, again, a lot of what can actually be commercialized or what can be brought to bear are things that are more about the translational part. It's about taking things that have been discovered and actually making them useful. And that involves a set of skills that I'm going to talk about in a minute. One final thing I want to talk about in all of this is the reality of the economics of what we're doing. As an economist, this is near and dear to my heart because I look at this process and I look at it through an economist's eyes. And through an economist's eyes, it's rather a bizarre sort of thing, which is if you just look at the numbers, we're training way more PhDs in this country that are ever going to get jobs as faculty members. And yet, that's what the reward system is structured about. So many more are being minted. There are more postdocs taken in. I mean, I think the figure is, what, there are 1,700 about postdocs at Stanford. How many faculty members regular faculty members do you think there are at Stanford? Same number. So if you all are trying to get jobs at Stanford, well, it kind of balances, but nah, it ain't going to happen in a flow sense, flow versus a stock sense. So way more that are being minted. So where are all these people going to go? Where are you all going to go? And the answer is you're not all going to go into academics. And I'll show you what's going to happen. So this is a somewhat dated one. This is from the National Science Foundation. They do a survey of earned doctorates. This is from 2000, but I'll tell you it's pretty representative. The reason I'm using this is because it has the information that year was tabulated in a way that I'm useful. So you can kind of locate the row that you're in. And no matter what row you're in, a couple of observations are going to apply. Many people at the time they're surveyed, which is nominally a couple of months after they get their doctorate, still don't know what they're doing. So I don't know why that is. I didn't find that the case, but it apparently is the case. If you're in the natural sciences or engineering, there are varying rates at which people go do what you're doing, getting a postdoc. But overwhelmingly what happens is people go get a job. And a job could either be an academic job or a non-academic job. So the fraction of those that go get employed or plans unknown are in these columns here. And overwhelmingly, people are going into industry and business, not academic jobs. Now you may say, oh, I'm at Stanford. That won't be me. And maybe some of that's true. But actually, I'll tell you just from what I know in talking to the engineering school people, medical people, and what I know is going on in the social sciences, a large number of people who get PhDs from here or postdocs are going to go into industry. Probably around half, according to the data. So you have to ask yourself, how well are we equipping these people who are going to go off and get jobs in industry with life in industry? And I think the overwhelming impression I had probably about 10 years ago, after being here 20 years, is we didn't do a very good job at all. And the reason I use 10 years ago is that's about the time that President Hennessy was starting to get on this push of we have to do a better job of equipping, especially our science and engineering students, for the prospect that if they're not going to get an academic job, that we might actually want to prepare them for life outside of academics. And that involves things like, just simple things like, having more business knowledge or having more knowledge of interdisciplinary work, because in the outside world, a lot of work is interdisciplinary, or just working more in teams. What could we do? And PRIE and SIE, which I'll talk about a little later, are deliberate reactions to that. A great thing about AIM is that they are actually doing in a structured way things that you should be paying attention to, whether or not you're going to be in academics or not, which are a set of things like, how do you do things like just work in a team? How do you give an effective presentation? These are all skills that you really need to have, and until recently, it was not organized at all within the university. And I think there's a bunch of people working to change that. In particular, the Vice Provost's Office for Graduate Education has been a key player in this effort to try and get graduate students and postdocs, or give them more access to opportunities to improve their skills if they're going to go in the outside world. And one of the themes you'll see I have in a minute, and my PRIE and SIE students already know, is I am a big proponent of the view that actually in terms of skill sets, there is a huge overlap between the skill set that an academic needs and an entrepreneur needs. In fact, you'll see in a slide in a little bit, I'm going to show you exactly how the two line up. So in my view, much of the training that's actually needed for entrepreneurs is the same training that's needed for academics to make them effective. There's just differences in terms of the language and the domain expertise. Okay, so that's the reality. So solutions, how could we solve this mismatch problem between what universities are doing or what students get versus what they might need or what society may want us to do? Well, an obvious thing is to throw money at the problem. That'll solve everything, more money. One thing I'll just note is the National Science Foundation has recently given Stanford, I believe it's a $10 million grant to create something called an innovation core, this grant was given to the engineering school, the STVP program there. Part of this money will go into trying to create programs that essentially facilitate more translational work by at least engineers. A couple of other things that I think are really important that could be worked on is federal policy towards university IP could be changed in various ways. Actually, it's very important that if scientists in universities are going to do translational work, they have to be able to have some prospect of a reward from that. And most work that's done at a place like Stanford is done in part through federal monies. And that gives the federal government implicitly a claim on that, although many of those claims have been waived. But there's still policies about, at least on the federal level, as it spills over to the university level, that can affect the returns to faculty or students from working on intellectual property that gets translated from more basic types of discoveries. The university, as I mentioned, has this thing called the OTL office, which is the Office of Technology Licensing. Believe it or not, when you have to disclose things that you discover here if you're using significant university resources. At the point of disclosure, that actually is a key to Stanford claims the right to those discoveries. You do not own them. Stanford does. At that point, Stanford will nominally decide whether it wants to patent that technology, whether it wants to license it in some way to another entity. And it's at that point which, if a faculty member or a graduate student or a staff member wants to actually prosecute that technology as a startup would actually approach OTL to grant it a license. And the university actually will ask for money. We'll say, actually, the thing you discovered, that's our idea. And if you want to use it in a company, you got to pay us. And here's how much you have to pay us, and here's how much fraction of a revenue we're going to take if you actually produce something. That's kind of discouraging, isn't it? Right? I mean, I came up with it, but it's the universities. And they're going to ask me for money. The kicker is the university turns around and distributes those fees, any revenue it gets, at a certain rate back to the home department of the faculty member, to the faculty member actually gets some claim on those monies, and a third of it actually goes to funding graduate students. So actually, a lot of the intellectual property that's being generated here, some of you are benefiting from that. But the terms on which that's done could be changed, and I don't want to go into the details. There are things that could be done, I think, to improve that process. And then the final thing, which I think is probably the best route for us to think about tonight, which is we could supplement the standard sort of training that you get here, building domain expertise, with some idea of a knowledge of what goes on in business or what's involved in translating research into things that are commercializable. So entrepreneurship is used in Ames' title. It's a word that's thrown around a lot. So I want to propose a definition for it, because I want to talk about it a little bit. So I want to say it's someone who identifies opportunities and then develops the resources and activities needed to create new things of value. So there are some big things here. The first thing is entrepreneurs identify opportunities. The second thing is that they develop something, so that's the sort of translational keyword there. They assemble resources, and they know how to do things. They know how to get things done. It's an important part of that definition. And the final thing is they're creating something of value. Okay? Something they can think of value as economic value, something that someone values. So the real question is, so who qualifies as an entrepreneur? And the proposition that I want to put forward is everybody in this room. Whether they're going to be an academic, or they're going to go work in industry, or even if they're going to go work for the government in certain cases. Okay, so how do I get that? So finding research ideas. Well, that kind of sounds like the opportunities part, right, or the definition of entrepreneurs. How to write a grant. Oh, you need resources to do research. Researchers need money. Better experiments. Interesting. How to start your lab. So there's some startup, something or other involved, and there's a facility involved. Managing a lab. That's a business word, managing. You need to give research talks. You need to actually selling your research. That was in one of your titles, the word selling. Managing your research budget. That sounds like accounting to me. Dealing with failure. Ooh. Yeah, and then professional networking was the title of another, okay? Those, by the way, are all listed under postdoc academic talks on the Ames website, okay? And actually, many of these are cross-listed on the VPGE website as academic, okay? So I direct these two programs that are run out of the business school, PRIE and SIE, which I will again put off telling you about, but I'll just tell you there's some programs for people who are interested in entrepreneurship. So these are literal titles from classes in those programs. And I just invite you to line up the lines. And you should be struck by the parallels. I always am. Which is the same things that you would want an academic to be able to do, giving a research talk. Yeah, in business, it's called giving a pitch, selling your ideas. Okay? It's exactly the same content, exactly the same content. We even talk about dealing with failure. We talk about managing employees as opposed to managing a lab. Essentials for starting a business, how to start up your lab. I mean, the parallels are striking. Basically, the same types of talks you might be going to figure out how to be a better academic are the same things that we would, in the business school, be talking to business school students about how to be a good entrepreneur. So just from the talk titles, amazing parallels. I think there's even more. The first thing is, when I talk to certainly my own graduate students, and I do have, this year I have 3 graduate students on the market, 3 PhD students on the market. And I try to tell them what is it about being an academic? Well, the first thing I try to tell them is, look, when you come to me with a thesis topic, it's got to be something somebody hasn't done. You have to be able to imagine things that, are contributions. You have to have the vision thing. And a big problem with a lot of students is that's a difficult thing to do. How do you do something original? Well, if you think about an entrepreneur coming up with an idea for a business, it's the same deal. You have to pretty much imagine something that isn't a new product, a new service. Even if it's duplicating something, you're adding something to it. You're figuring out a new way of doing it. So both have to be a visionary. The second thing is problem solvers, which is after I say, that's a great thesis topic, the next words out of my mouth are, how are you going to solve that? How are you going to develop a model of it? How are you going to collect data for it? And a big part of actually doing research, once you get past the what's the question part, is you got to be a problem solver. And I have had plenty of students over the years who were great at coming up with ideas, but could not execute on those ideas. And some of them didn't get their PhDs. Some of them were helped enormously along the way. But ultimately, I think if you're talking about a good academic, it's not just somebody who has the vision thing, it's somebody actually who's a good problem solver. When they run into a wall, they get the idea, I'm going to dig under it, I'm going to go around it, I'll go over the top, or I'll get out my howitzer and blast through it. But they solve problems, and hopefully without too much direction. And finally, there's actuators. I mean, there's a doer part to being an academic. I mean, you really, as much as most of us would love to have tons of people in our lab, doing everything, at the end of the day, when you're starting out, you have to be a doer. You have to do most of the stuff yourself, and if you're not good at doing stuff, no matter how visionary you are, no matter how much you can imagine solving the problem, if you just can't actually put the time in grade, you're not going to get anywhere. It's completely the same with entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs have the same 3 key things. So what are the differences? So I think the differences are several, but they're not huge. First, there's a difference in language and rewards. Business people talk a different language, and in part that's a hurdle to being in business, figuring out that language. The reward structure is different. We talk about profit, shareholder value. In academics, peer review, completely different way of thinking about what the game is. There's obviously domain expertise, differences in knowledge. You have to know something about business, even if it's an engineering idea, a life sciences idea. There's just certain domain knowledge in business that has to be acquired beyond sort of scientific or technical knowledge. A big difference, I think, between academics and people who end up starting companies or being in industry is what I call the interpersonal factor. And for a while, I had a really hard time explaining this. But now I have a good way of explaining it. How many engineers do we have in the audience? Perfect. Okay, what's the difference between an introverted and an extroverted engineer? Anybody know? Well, an introverted engineer is someone who, when they talk to you, looks at their shoes. An extroverted engineer is someone who, when they talk to you, looks at your shoes. And that's the difference, which is there's a certain tunnel vision that I think helps in academics. My wife calls this well, most academics just lack the social gene, and that's what's made them good at what they do. And on the other hand, I find when scientists in particular, react to MBAs, it's, oh, God, all those people do is talk and network. And, to a certain extent, that's right. Not that they do it all the time, but there's a certain sort of interpersonal aspect of business that's not necessarily true in much of academics. But just go to a conference and you'll see even the extroverted engineer starting to look up at people. It's a sales job. But in business, I think it's more explicit. Difference in institutional environment, obvious. Fiduciary responsibilities, obvious. Passive versus active voice. This is an interesting thing, although I think it's becoming less true. In science, often we do things in the passive voice. Why? Because it sounds objective. In business, everything is active voice, right? I did this, it was, it is the way it is. There's just a different sort of tone, even in the expression in the writing. And one final difference I find is a notion of deliverables. So there's the question, how do we encourage more translational work? Alternatively, I've phrased it this way. So what indeed is the answer to this question? And overwhelmingly, I find that people will say the answer to this question for a postdoc is forget everything, I'm going to go to business school. If I go to business school, I could avoid this route. Business school, that's the magic bullet. They'll teach me all about business. And I think that's the wrong thing for you to be thinking about as science and technical people. I think it is useful to think about translational stuff, but you don't need to go to business school to learn what you need to learn to operate in a business environment, to start your own company. You really want to take advantage of the fact that you have domain expertise. That's your primary form of expertise. And what you have to learn is where your limits are with respect to the other dimensions that you might need to actually start a company or be involved with people who, like MBAs, who are involved in understanding how you might set up a company. So what I'm going to do now is just tell you a little bit about the business school. So Stanford Business School is a huge operation. It does many, many things. We have, I think, 8 or 9 buildings now over on the other end of campus. They were just opened in March. Those buildings contain a bunch of different things, but the main signature thing is we have an MBA program, which is a 2-year program. There are 780 students, roughly split evenly across the first and a second year. The first thing you should know about them is these people are being trained to be general managers. They're not typically being trained to do startups. Only about 5% of our students actually go on and do a startup straight out of school. So I wouldn't call them necessarily entrepreneurs in the sort of startup sense. They're trained to be managers. So if your idea is, oh, I want to get involved in a startup, or I'm going to be involved in a science or technical organization, the reason to go to a business school is because you're going to want to be a general manager. You want to forsake, basically, your science and technical skills. And that's kind of a write-off that I think is a mistake for many people. So most MBAs do not leverage their technical backgrounds. Some do, but the bulk don't, and most don't do startups. We have a small 1-year master's program, which is for executives 10 to 15 years out of school. We have 120 PhD students in a variety of different fields. We run some ad hoc executive programs, and recently we've added 2 programs to the list, PRIE and SIE, which are actually not for business school students. They're for you all, so I'm going to talk about those again in a minute. Let me just talk about, if you're interested in, what could I do at the business school? How might I sort of expand my entrepreneurial thinking or my knowledge of business? And the answer that I like to give is, well, one thing is to take a class. It used to be the business school classes weren't open to students on the outside, and that has completely changed. Not every class is open. Our core classes, which go for our first-year students, are typically not open to outside students, but I've just sort of created a list here, which I've found postdocs in over the years, recent years. So let me just talk about a few of these. 353 is actually a course that I teach. It's called New Venture Formation. It is a survey course of 20 lectures involved with how do you start a company. Okay, so if you're interested in a startup, what does it involve? What does it take? How do you finance it? How do you hire people? Do I C Corp, S Corp? Lots of different questions are answered in that course. That is our core second-year course in entrepreneurship. Another signature course is 355, 356, which is a 2-quarter sequence that actually goes into the nitty-gritty detail of starting a business. At the end of it, you both have a business plan for a venture, and that business plan is actually pitched in front of some entrepreneurs and venture capitalists typically. It's very similar to some of the ideas that are in PRIE and SIE. But with instructor permission, PhD students, postdocs have taken that course before. Subject to the usual restrictions on whether grad students can take things for credit or not credit typically. But postdocs end up in that course. 2 other popular courses now are 333 and 344, which are designed for extreme affordability, which deals with actually developing products, cheap products for the developing world. and design for service innovation, which deals with, well, this past year it dealt with biomedical services, but it deals with services broadly. Those are two courses that are largely about either product development or service organization development that have postdocs in them. There's biodesign program, which has a bunch of things. Healthcare in particular is interesting. I might mention that in general, we tend to see more life sciences postdocs than we see engineering postdocs, but even that's changing. In the business school, courses are numbered either 200, 300, 400, and above. When you get up to 600, they're doctoral courses. 200 level courses are first-year courses. Typically, they're not open. And the reason for that is we're kind of constrained in terms of what we offer in our first year for our MBA students, and we have sections that basically are full. So there almost literally is no space to put more people. But in our electives, 300 and higher level, I would say probably about half of the business school's instructors are now used to auditors from outside auditing their classes. It's usually with instructor permission, but many more instructors are now granting it. And postdocs are something that increasingly, I think, business school faculty are becoming used to as a concept. Postdocs from around the university are often used in both courses and informal programs within the business school to do mentorship. So our biodesign program often looks for people with expertise, for example, that might be relevant to a medical device startup. So that's looking for science and technical people that could help with science or technical things. And there are postdocs who serve as biodesign mentors or fellows. Our 355, 356 course, which has projects which are turned into businesses, they're often looking for mentors on technical issues. Recently, the business school has actually opened up 2 postdoc positions. Business school doesn't have many postdoc positions, but the design for service course actually has 2 postdoc positions, one of which has been filled, and there's still one open. So we even are starting to get postdocs within the business school. We offer so many conferences and talks during the year, it's impossible to summarize them. If you want to know where to find them, here's the link. Some popular series that are open to the public. We have a View from the Top series, which brings in lots of famous people. So Bob Iger, head of Disney, was in a recent talk. Alan Mulally, who's head of Ford, was here recently, and those were in the last month or 2 of the spring quarter. So there's just a litany of very famous, the CEO of United was in this spring. They're just, if you're looking for famous business people, this is the series that brings them through. There are various other series. You can find them here. E-Week is Entrepreneurship Week. It's a 1-week thing that's usually in February. It's co-sponsored by a bunch of organizations around campus, including the business school. The business school puts on its own set of activities during E-Week, and those are easily discovered by just subscribing to a listserv which will feed you entrepreneurship things. There are various ones at Stanford. I'm sure Amy is probably aware of this and blasts this out, but it's something that's well worth participating in. We do ad hoc conferences. The GSB Healthcare Summit this fall should be of interest to life sciences types because it explores the intersection between academics and healthcare companies, particularly startups. Another source that I think people underrate is our business students are often looking to find you guys. In fact, I don't know how many times I field the question from an MBA student, how do I find somebody in computer science? And they say, oh, you don't understand. They don't do web pages there in computer science. They do other things. And they go, oh, no, I get it. I need an algorithms expert. So our students are often looking for science and technical types. And actually, there's a thing that can easily facilitate this. If you go on the GSB website, there are over 40 clubs. I mean, there's a brewery club and all sorts of stuff. But some clubs that are interesting is the Entrepreneurship Club has their own weekly seminar series where they bring in startup entrepreneurs. It's a great set of talks. It's open. You could mix with business school students who are interested in entrepreneurship. I think it's something worth exploring. The Healthcare Club is very active. Interested in all sorts of business issues, not just startup, but even big life sciences, therapeutics companies. There's a high-tech club which does the same sort of thing, so that's more engineering-oriented. So those are things to explore if you're interested in just connecting with business school students. Certainly they're interested in connecting with you. Jackson Library is a fabulous resource. If you want to know anything about business, there's just a ton of resources there. Everything from analyst reports, you can go find information about just about any company, even private companies. It's just a huge resource. They have librarians there who will just fall all over you if you walk in and say you need help. And it's open to everybody in the university. There are a bunch of cross-school collaborations that are currently going on between the business school and different schools. So I'll just mention those. There's the biodesign program with the medical school. We do things with the D school. We have a joint degree program now with the ed school. And then there's the engineering school, STVP, and CES, which is the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies. We're currently doing a bunch of things there. The best way to sort of figure out about the business school is just to show up in the cafeteria. This is my theory of how to interact. So the two programs. Okay, so here's my pitch to you. So this is like me giving a pitch. This is a sales pitch. SIE, this is the oldest of the programs. It was started in 2006 with 35 students. We just finished the program in the middle of July of this year. We had 100 students this year. So we've expanded significantly in size. It's delivered both from the business school and the vice provost's office for graduate education. The vice provost's office sort of got together with the business school and said, we really would like to offer some sort of curriculum that graduate students could take where they could sort of increase their entrepreneurial knowledge, their business knowledge, and might make them successful, whether or not they're going to go into industry or not. So from the vice provost's office, the perspective is actually, we'd even like you to make academics more effective academics. And I think if you talk to the students in the audience who have been through this program, you will hear from them that this program is just as valuable if you want to be an academic as if you want to go out and work in industry. So I'll tell you why. So some statistics on it. Most students, I think, who go through this program just keep going. They get their PhD or whatever, and they become an academic. So it's not just about starting companies, although I think that's sometimes the perception of some faculty and students that what we're about is creating startups and all sorts of things like that. That's decidedly not the case. As a faculty member, I'd never let that happen. What we do try to do is we try to bring in different faculty from the business school that are have an expertise on different topics, much like the topics that you saw listed earlier, where what they try to do is bring their academic perspective to thinking about how might these be prosecuted in a business environment. In addition to sort of add a translational component, we bring in people who are not faculty members. The program is like a revolving door. We bring in about 30 or 40 entrepreneurs, professional funders to try and reinforce a lot of what the faculty are delivering in terms of advice about how to do various things. So what is it? It's 4 weeks in the summer. It's full-time. And what past participants will tell you is the biggest mistake they made was not thinking it's intensive, not thinking it was academic, not thinking that they were going to work their butts off. If you apply to this program, please understand you will not be doing lab work. You will not be doing anything else but pay attention to faculty like me. You'll have homework. You'll have meetings with project groups. you pretty much will be working full-time for 4 weeks. Yeah, it's a serious academic program. There's readings, it's intense, and I think the general perception is, 4 weeks in the summer, I'll just take some time off, I'll sit there with a little binder, turn the pages, and that's what it's all about. Forget it, that's not what it's all about. Actually, we have learning by doing, we have learning by thinking. Our faculty love it because most of the students we get in there are just incredibly smart. I had one finance faculty member come back one day and said, a student came up to me and asked me about an ANATA condition. Their eyes just lit up. If you don't know what that is, it's a very technical sort of thing that has to do with math programming. And that just made their day. But the fact that it actually came up in an entrepreneurship program, crap, that's pretty darn amazing. It's an academic program. It's not about explicitly starting companies, although, as I'll point out in a minute, a lot of students who go through this, not most, but a lot, actually end up going into industry, and some actually start their own businesses. Okay, so the target audience, graduate students and postdocs from everywhere. I put humanities in there, and I emphasized humanities because few people believe that. 2 summers ago, we had 2 PhDs from the music department. They were absolutely fabulous. They were just great. We have students who are interested in social entrepreneurship, so doing innovations that don't have a for-profit motive, that are just there to benefit society. So we've had students interested in doing energy-efficient cooking pots, energy-efficient and economical solar cells, developing developing essentially solutions for vitamin deficiencies that involve food supplements. So it's not just about for-profit things. Student mix, we shoot for at least 3/4 Stanford students, but we also bring in students from afar, and by afar that's typically overseas. What we look for is we look for graduate students from overseas that have the same technical abilities, knowledge, IQ, whatever you want to think of as Stanford students, but who would complement the atmosphere here at Stanford. So a lot of those students come from Asia, some from Europe. We're always looking for other parts of the world, though, to take students to try and make the program in some sense more interesting, and I think it expands what people view as interesting things to work on. So in the 4 weeks, we have roughly 50, I think it's 50 or 55 classes. So even just class time is pretty demanding just in terms of time. We put you through all types of classes. We do some business foundations. How do you read an accounting statement? What does debt financing mean? What does a debt contract look like? To marketing, how do you market something? How do you actually form a sales organization? We do a bunch of stuff with entrepreneurship. How do you get venture capital? How do you start your own company? What type of organizational form should you choose for it? Where should you start it? We do a bunch of things with design, both organizational design and both literally product design. And some of that's done in combination with the design school. So there's a bunch of classwork, and then a key part is a project. Students come in. They come in with ideas. We have a bake-off of those ideas. Student teams are formed around the winning ideas. And in a typical summer, this past summer we had 18 different projects that were being worked on. Students basically develop those as ideas that are then going to be pitched to a panel of entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. So the idea is, while you're carrying along a course load, in the evenings, on the weekends, you're basically developing a business. And that's why it's so intense. You don't get much of a break. So you come in, and within 4 weeks, you know you're going to be standing up in front of a bunch of venture capitalists. And the way I like to describe this to academics is, imagine that you have 4 faculty in your field that are there that are just going to torture you in your oral exam. That's the experience. And so the idea is to get students to the point where they can actually deliver a credible pitch. And the feedback I typically get is by the time you're done with the 4 weeks, you can actually put together, well, 4 weeks, an incredible pitch. And that's one of the benefits of the program. Here's some just statistics. I'm a statistics guy. So just some idea of where people are coming from. I don't know why, but engineering contributes a lot. But engineering here includes computer sciences and bioengineering, a bunch of things like that, which is not put in medicine. But we even take a bunch from H&S. This program, SIE, takes a mix of students, PhD and postdoc. Of this number, I think this past year we had roughly about, get this right, I think about 18% were postdocs in this program, so about 18 students. The fraction of women, which we're always looking to improve, roughly reflects what we see in the MBA program. We work very hard on this number. I always think of this number as, wow, we did great, in the sense that if you just look at the pool of graduate students we're trying to draw from, there are not that many women. We encourage women to apply. We love to have women entrepreneurs, so please think about us. If you're a woman, we want to get that number as high as we can. So there's some things about the classes. One thing I didn't mention is we spend a bunch of time on what I call the soft skills. Overwhelmingly, when people evaluate the program at the end, particularly the engineers, they say, wow, I've discovered myself. I can do things I never thought I could do. I can get up and give a presentation. I thought I could never do that. They've learned about how to negotiate. I now know I can negotiate better with my advisor. What better skill to have than that? So there's a bunch of things that are kind of on the softer side of things, but I think many students sort of see that as just, if not more valuable than knowing accounting or things like that. So we're trying to create, and all of these things are absolutely essential if you're going to be an academic. If you're going to be an academic and you can't stand up in front of a conference with way more people than this and project and give a seminar and be clear and organized, you're going nowhere as an academic. Same thing's true in business. You've got to get people to buy the product. In academics, the product is a research idea. In business, it's a new product or service, but the parallels are just incredible. Here are some goals. Just going to leave those in. The slides will be put up somewhere where you can get access to them. I'm just going to flip through them quickly in the interest of talking about this. What we are not about. So I want to make it clear what we're not about, because I think some students arrive with misperceptions. We're not about proselytizing. These programs are not being run to start companies, to incubate companies. We're actually an academic program. I view a success of the program is if I discourage somebody from being an entrepreneur, I view that as just as successful as if they go become an entrepreneur in the business world. I'm about giving information. I'm about trying to tell you, it's going to do translational stuff. Here's what it's about. You decide. And I think that's the value. The value is if you're going to go on and do academics, you have an idea of what it's about. Academics even participate in companies, kind of on the side, even if it's just vicariously. So it's something where information is a valuable thing, and that's what we do. The other thing is, I have wasting time up there. We're a serious program. We don't mess around. All the former students here will tell you I'm a serious guy. We're here to, in some sense, reinforce the academic experience. Yeah, that's what we're doing. So it's real classwork. Even though there's a translational part, we try to approach the translational part from the perspective, from an academic perspective, trying to understand it, know what's involved, involved, so it's as much an understanding as it is prescriptive. PRIE, this is our second program. This is new this year. It was created by the following problem. Lots of students came to me and said, I can't get out of lab work. I can't get 4 weeks off in the summer. My advisor would never allow it. And I'd love to do this program, can't do it. So out of that was spawned the idea of, well, gee, maybe if we ran something that was part-time in the evenings during the academic year, that might be more feasible for people to get time off. So hence the idea for the program. The program has morphed somewhat. This is largely my doing, which is there's a whole technical and scientific community out there in the Bay Area that would love to come back to school to Stanford to sort of think about these things. And I started thinking, well, actually, it would be a tremendous benefit to graduate students to actually mix with people who are working in the real world at jobs that they might actually be doing in the future. So hence this program. The program is half Stanford graduate students and postdocs and half what I call Bay Area professionals. Bay Area professionals, same idea, science or technical background typically, or advanced degree of some sort. And we put the two groups together in an effort to try and make interesting things happen. We did that last year. I think it was, even by my standards, a success. So obviously we're going to do it again this year. It operates somewhat similarly to SIE, but with a major difference. We're not so much about entrepreneurship as a mix of things, entrepreneurship and what I call intrapreneurship. So within many large organizations, there's a need to be innovative. So a bunch of things that we do relate to what do we understand about how to create a startup environment, if you like, within a large company. So how does, for example, Cisco keep its innovative juices flowing? We spend a bunch of time talking about that type of material. How do you form an R&D organization? Those sorts of things. Here are the details. It starts middle of January, goes to middle of March. Tuesday and Thursday evenings from 6 to 9. There'll be 5 Saturdays involved. Same sort of thing. I might mention that in both programs, admission is extremely competitive. So between the two programs, this year we might take 120, 130 students. Last year we had over 700 applications to get in. So we can't take everybody. We're looking for the best. I want the best. I want a mix. We have all sorts of constraints, but if you're interested, you've got to apply. There's an application. We treat the application seriously. Recommendations from advisors count enormously. We're looking for people who are not just about starting companies. We're looking for people who could benefit from what it is that we have to offer, whether they want to go the academic route or the startup route. So just student profiles for the program. So here are the Stanford students. It wasn't exactly 50-50 last year. For the Stanford students, most came from the medical school. The outsiders, most came from engineering. So that's how we got a balance there. You'll notice that 56% of the pre-students last year were postdocs. Okay, so actually this is a program that's very popular, it seems, with postdocs. I mean, we had a lot of, well, not a lot, but we had a good dose of postdocs apply last year, and we took a lot of them. I happen to think that the postdocs we see are great, so I want more. And that's presumably people in this room. I think postdocs have a perspective sometime that's very useful. Having gotten your PhD and then being on doing something else, I think, forces you into a mode where you've got to contemplate, where am I going with my life? And that's just very enabling in terms of them actually putting energy into the program. There are some sample departments. For the outsiders, here's the mix of companies. Most of them are big companies, but we took about half of these people were also just interested in doing their own startup. Here's an idea of sample participants. So here's a Bay Area professional that we took. I've hidden some details here but the details are roughly right, and there's a detail of a Stanford postdoc we took with a few things hidden so that they're not obviously identifiable. Okay, so you can see, technical backgrounds, what they're interested in doing with the program. Information, so if you want to find out about the programs, there are the two places. You can just Google PRIE and SIE and they'll come up. There's no application fee. You can use the same application for both programs. You can apply to one or both. If you apply to both, give a preference. Again, admission is extremely competitive, especially to PRIE. Especially to PRIE. We don't take as many students in PRIE, and the fact that it's an evening program, it seems like we get a lot more students interested in it. So if you're interested in PRIE, just realize it's very competitive. You might want to also consider applying to SIE if you can also do that program. The deadline for applying this year is November 1st. We do rolling admissions, and I like to say by rolling admissions, we really mean rolling admissions. If you wait until the 1st, and by the way, I asked this year, how many students actually applied within 2 days of the deadline, and with the Stanford students, it was 75%. With the Bay Area professionals, it was like 5%. So being in the real world, actually, you stop procrastinating. Do not procrastinate is my advice. Because I don't have spots typically for 75% that are going to apply in the last 2 days. So if you wait that long, not a good thing. So if you actually went home and within the next week opened an application and started, that would be highly desirable. You'll certainly get more attention. Yeah, questions? It's a long sort of thing. So are there any questions?